On October 7th, in the year 788, Abd al-Rahman I died. Now, surprisingly enough, for a man who was known as a great organizer, he didn't lay down good plans for his succession, and with the Iberian Peninsula still being a dangerous land, with plenty of internal and external antagonists, this wasn't a great move. Rahman's three sons immediately began fighting for control. His most pious and somewhat introverted son, Hisham I, fought and defeated his two brothers, Abd Allah and Suleiman, near the city of Jaén, which is in southern Spain. He proceeded to exile them both. Now, he wasn't mean about it. He didn't kill them or maim them. He actually gave them a decent amount of money and then booted them down to North Africa, which goes to show he was kind of a decent guy. But perhaps, as a mental note, when it comes to politics and succession, sometimes you need to watch out for the quiet ones. Hisham's rule was marked by his religious and virtuous values, which makes him sound a bit boring. He was a man that liked to take the moral high ground, if he could, but he only managed to reign for about 8 years before he died, quote-unquote, unexpectedly. From what I've read, it wasn't a malicious death. At least no one seemed to be able to prove otherwise. But come on, the man was only 40. Now, folks, just as a side note, please don't memorize all the dates and the names and the people. Rather, I think the focus should be on all the challenges that Al-Andalus had to go through, all the ups and downs. I'll do my best to give you the best parts. Hisham, the pious one, was succeeded by his second son, Al-Hakam, and as we're about to see, every time a new emir came to power, Al-Andalus would be thrown back into turmoil as rebellions and uprisings and chaos would erupt across the land. There is a great Klingon proverb that emphasizes this. It goes, "We're not interested in your lineage or the names of your father. What we are interested in is your breaking point." Al-Hakam was immediately challenged by his uncles who came out of exile from North Africa to fight him for the throne. He met one of his uncles, the aforementioned Suleiman, in 797 and defeated him outside of Cordoba. He drove him back to Merida and captured him in the year 800. Now, Al-Hakam in some ways was a direct opposite of his father. He was not exactly the most pious, quite the contrary. He liked to indulge in worldly pleasures. Wine, women, you name it. But what was passed down to him was a certain ruthless streak. The man had absolutely no tolerance or patience for rebellion. He was renowned for how quickly he would act, and he got to pamper his more aggressive nature on a regular basis. After capturing his uncle, he had him immediately executed. No mamby-pamby, political correct, moral high ground exile. No. He saw to it that his uncle's head left his body. Then, in 797, Toledo revolted and he was able to brutally put this down. Now get a load of this. In 805, there was a conspiracy to have the emir replaced by one of his cousins. Al-Hakam got word of the coup, and in line with his character, he inconspicuously threw a lavish feast, inviting the ringleaders, all 72 of them, including their entourage, which brought the dinner reservation to about 5,000 people. I want you to imagine the scene in your head. This is a huge dinner. The finest wine, the best food, some great music to accompany it all. And this to keep everybody amused and intoxicated. And then, towards the end of the meal, he dings his fork along his glass and then proceeds to reveal to everybody that he has known about the plot the entire time. Al-Hakam systematically rounded up everyone and had them at regular intervals crucified along the banks of the Guadalquivir River. Yes, all 72 leaders and their entourage. When it was all said and done, there were 5,000 crosses along the riverfront. The rest of his reign was one of bloody revolt after another. High taxes were a leading culprit, along with severe discontent among the Muwalid, who were Christians that had converted to Islam and felt like they were being treated like second-class citizens, which to some extent they were. In 818, towards the end of his reign, there was another uprising in the suburbs of Cordoba called the Al-Ribad, which was a mix of Christian and Jewish and Muslim descent. They were working-class artisans. These people rose up against Hakam, whose leadership style at this point was near tyrannical. Despite an ongoing fight, it too was brought down, and over 300 were executed by the tried and true method of crucifixion. Now, those that didn't manage to get executed were banished. This was going to be a serious loss of tradesmen and skilled workers for Córdoba. The emirate as a whole was weakened. A weakened state is a ripe opportunity. To the north, in the Cantabrian mountain range, the Christian kingdoms continued to pose a threat to the Islamic south. The early Islamic conquest was never really able to drive these resilient people from their land, but not from lack of trying. It became almost a national pastime for the governors and later for the emirs of Andalusia to launch raids and try to do us some damage. But when things went sour for the emirs, it would be the Christians who would be able to exact some sort of payback. When the Berber revolt was in full swing in 740, the north managed to recapture the Duero River Valley and turn it into a buffer zone, a no-man's land. And when Al-Hakam was busy trying to reestablish order in his almost perpetually rebellious country, the Asturian king, Alfonso II, launched his own raids. This man was a king for a really long time, especially by conventional standards where rulers seemed to come and go rather quickly. He set up a court in the northern city of Oviedo and was the man in charge from 791 all the way to 842. His lands became a refuge for the Christians who felt persecuted in the south. He used this discontent to his advantage, launching multiple attacks. One of these raids in 798 actually made it all the way down to Lisbon, which he sacked. It was also during his time that he supposedly discovered the tomb of St. James the Apostle, which was discovered around the year 830. Now, just as an aside, and this may just appeal to me as I'm big into the whole name derivation thing, James comes from the Hebrew Yaakov, which in Latin is Jacob, and thus in Spanish is Iago. Of course, if you add the fact that he's a saint, you get Santo Iago, which is where you get Santiago. Now, since we're also dealing with a tomb, there are two Latin roots that I've discovered. One is Compostela, meaning field of stars, and also Composita Tella, which means burial ground, which, if you add all this together, as I've been told, is where you get the modern name, Santiago de Compostela. For those of you not in the know, Santiago de Compostela is a city in northwestern Spain which houses a magnificent cathedral that is supposed to house the remains of St. James. To this day, it is one of the most popular pilgrimage routes in the world. The Way of St. James, or the Camino de Santiago as it's known, starts in the French Pyrenees and now attracts hundreds of thousands of people every year. Okay, back to the main story. The northern Christians were not alone. The Franks also used this time of instability to fight back as well. They raided and retook the southern province of France, Narbonne. In fact, in 801, King Louis of Aquitaine even managed to capture Barcelona. As I've mentioned before, this was a roller coaster time for Islamic Spain. The dynasty of the Umayyad Emirate would ebb and flow depending on its leaders, but every once in a while you'd get a ruler that managed to bring things together again. In 822, Abd al-Rahman II came to power. His ascension was carefully articulated to avoid the bloodshed and civil war that marked his forebears. He was a pious, educated military leader who, like his predecessors, had a flair for the ruthless suppression of rebellion. But at the same time, he was also very much open to the needs and wants of his own people, as long as they obeyed. Of course, despite all the preparation that preceded him, as soon as he came to power, he was immediately challenged by internal strife. Right off the bat, he had to put down a rebellion by his own granduncle Abd Allah, who came out of retirement from his home in Valencia again and tried to claim the throne. The old man didn't make it very far, but you gotta give him an A for effort at least. Later, in 828 and again in 830, he had to lay siege to Mérida twice when the Christians in the north convinced the city leaders to rise up in rebellion. He would have to do the same to Toledo in 837. Basically, this man was running from place to place with his army putting out fires with a brutal conviction. But his strong-arm approach, and some would call this tyranny, paid off. Al-Andalus entered into a period of internal peace, which allowed her to grow and to flourish. With his internal enemies mostly suppressed, Abd al-Rahman II would now turn outwards to attack foreign opposition. He was locked in almost perpetual war with the aforementioned Alfonso II of Asturias, who he would raid on an almost constant basis. You know, we all need a hobby, and raiding the north was his. There was even an Islamic name for it, Saifa, or Summer Expedition. Now, he was also known to have taken the fight to the Franks. In 841, he started to plunder Narbonne, and the rest of southern France for that matter, and he did so well at this that even Charles the Bald, who was the son of Charlemagne and the ruler of the Holy Roman Empire, was forced to recognize the growing power of Al-Andalus. In the city of Reims, a peace treaty was struck between both powers in 847. What can I say? The man and his emirate were gaining recognition as a major European player. Now, before we can continue, we need to discuss one of the most impressive accounts of Abd al-Rahman II's leadership, which happened in the year 844. In the year 844, the kingdom of Asturias in the north came under attack by a seafaring army. They struck along the coast, destroying villages and raining down destruction as they went. They appeared from the watery horizon, yelling and screaming as they engaged in their amphibious assaults. No one was left unmolested, and nothing was too sacred to be taken. They didn't seem to care about politics. They didn't seem to discriminate about religion. But what they did do is begin to move south. Later that year, in August, they arrived at Lisbon, and for 3 long, bloody days they sacked the city, pushing her defenders aside with ease. But just before the city fell, the governor managed to get out a cry for help. This was a catastrophe. Rahman wasn't going to take any chances. He mobilized his entire army. But the thought continued in his mind, could these people be stopped? And for that matter, who were these warriors of the sea? These seafaring people were the Vikings, and they continued to move south to the mouth of the Guadalquivir River, where they beached their ships and began to move inland. They set up shop on a small island called the Isla Menor near Seville, which in early October they proceeded to sack the same way they had done to Lisbon. Seville at this point had no city walls, which made the carnage of the Norsemen almost complete. Those that were able-bodied fled the city, leaving the old, the infirmed, the women, the young to be taken by the Vikings. Most of them were either massacred or sold into slavery. So much for chivalry, huh? But now the emir brought in his army. He brought together contingents from all over Spain, including political rivals that were now turned into last-second allies, like members of the Banu Qasi, who were renowned as excellent fighters. It was just to the south of Seville that the Muslims and the Vikings finally met. From the book, A Viking Age, we get the following account of what happened, and in this rendition, the term Majus is the Arabic label for people of Northern Europe, that is, Scandinavia. Quote, "The Majus had arrived in about 80 ships. One might say they had, as it were, filled the ocean with dark red birds in the same way that they had filled the hearts of men with fear and with trembling. After landing at Lisbon, they sailed on to Cadiz, and then to Sidonia, and then to Seville. They besieged this city and took it by storm. After letting the inhabitants suffer the terrors of imprisonment or death, they remained there for 7 days, during which time they let the people empty the cup of bitterness." End quote. I have to admit that's a pretty dramatic account, but as I had just mentioned, the emir and his army had just shown up. And on November 11th, 844, the Battle of Teylata began. This battle started off as a bunch of smaller skirmishes that grew into a larger one, both sides funneling in reinforcements into key areas. Sometimes the Moors would show what a scimitar could do, and other times the Vikings would show what a battle axe and broadsword could do. But then the emir brought up his catapults and ordered his men to begin launching Greek fire. which was essentially medieval napalm. Fire literally rained down on the Vikings, causing pandemonium, and eventually even these fierce northern warriors were routed. Many managed to flee, but many more didn't and were summarily executed. Now, not all of them died. Some of these men from the north converted to Islam and began to settle in Spain, where, of all things, they took up the profession of making cheese. Yeah, that's right, they made cheese for Cordoba. So, just to recall, because honestly, people, I don't think anyone could just make this up, and even for me, this is kind of bizarre. Vikings invade Spain to take on the Muslims, who defeat them with Greek fire, and then these great, fierce, blonde-haired Norsemen become esteemed producers of dairy product. Well, what can I say to this? In the immortal words of a great movie, blessed are the cheesemakers. Flashpoint History is dedicated to making history accessible for everyone. If you like this series, consider contributing on Patreon or following along on Facebook or Twitter, the links for which will be in the description of the video. In the meantime, hit that subscribe button, spread word about the podcast, and leave some witty comments below.